in, those are some of the qualities. They are listeners and visualizers. There must be some form of media literacy there. The technology piece still has to be figured out, and that they are born within this particular time frame that we have demarcated as the hip-hop generation. Now, interpretive communities are cultivated through political and or persuasive means in order to establish, right, an informed set of interpretive assumptions. So the work that we have to do within hip-hop scholarship is just that. Now, I think sometimes my work is a little persuasive, sometimes it's a bit political. Hopefully it will always sort of straddle the two in order to achieve the objective, which in this particular case is kind of knowledging up this so-called interpretive community. So the interpretive community must engage the media in a socially critical and sophisticated manner, and I'll give you a quick example of this. Some of you might be very, very familiar with the media coverage of Katrina, and you might also be familiar with Kanye West's sort of unconscious outburst on NBC, right? He says, you know, Bush doesn't care about black people. Now, there's a way in which a lot of folks looked at that particular moment and were like, wow, you know, hip-hop has some politics to it, or hip-hop has a conscience. And I believe both of those things. I just don't believe that that particular moment was a reflection of that. And there's an underground rapper out of Philadelphia who sort of crystallized my feelings in a line where he says, I'm not mad about Kanye's comments. I'm more mad they call Kanye conscious. And I felt like that was a real powerful line, which is to say, why do we settle for that? As if somehow people felt that George Bush had some kind of extraordinary care for black folk in the first place. Why is it that we sort of arrive at that moment where Kanye West has this outburst, and it even appears that you see it as a sort of uncontrollable outburst? Why do we arrive there and think of that as a particularly conscious moment? And this particular rapper, I think, really captures that in the sense that we're almost settling for a certain kind of politics that doesn't seem to me to be very, very persuasive, or doesn't seem to me to be very much engaged in cultivating the interpretive community of hip-hop in the way that I would like to be as a hip-hop scholar. However, the lines by this underground rapper, Random, to me, that is a way of cultivating the community. That is a way of adjusting and informing certain interpretive assumptions that we can make about the presence of Kanye West in the media, what he's saying, and the entire Katrina sort of piece. Maybe if we have a little time in the end, we can circle back to that, because quite a bit of discourse has emerged out of hip-hop culture around Katrina, and I'm beginning to think it is one of those sort of watershed moments. But again, we'll come back to, again, critical media literacy here is what is important, and that seems to be one particular case. Now, many folk, and a lot of times when I give talks, a lot of folk are fairly frustrated with what hip-hop culture is at the mainstream level, the kind of music that you hear on radio, the kind of images that you see on TV. And I'll argue two things about that. One, you're absolutely right. There's misogyny and consumerism is somewhat rampant at the most popular levels of the music. But to me, that's a challenge. One, a challenge to, again, create an interpretive community that can critically engage those narratives, dissect those narratives. But two, also a challenge to the audience to understand that the culture and the music is much broader than that. It's much more substantive than that. We just have to be a bit more proactive about engaging the music and where and how we do that in order to have access to that. Again, part of the work here as a scholar of hip hop. And then lastly, and this is more geared towards what I have to do in the classroom along the lines of literature and literacy, is first, we have to understand that when we talk about literature, and I know this may sound a bit elite, but this is the way that I honestly feel about literature, we're assuming that there are certain qualitative connotations to that term, which is to say there are certain qualities and standards that are invested in the practice of literary study. We have to be able to establish those qualitative connotations and those standards within hip-hop culture. I think one that will allow us to sort of ferret out a lot of the consumerism and the kind of monotonous misogyny that we see within the culture. But it also, I think, will unveil what I think of as the underground of hip-hop culture, which is a bit more complex and usually more socially and politically engaged. There are very many ways that I do this kind of work, with this kind of uncovering kind of work. And one of the more important ones is to look at specific discourse patterns within the culture. Now, Jonathan, thank you for bringing me here. In the introduction,